Welcome back. I'll give everybody a moment to take your seats. So our next discussion this afternoon builds off an earlier discussion we had this morning and focuses on actionable steps to advance women's representation in leadership roles. So I think this is, again, another opportunity to think a little more about intentionality. I am excited to introduce our moderator and good friend of INS's, Janaki Cates. Janaki is a national security consultant and commentator, drawing on her nearly 18-year career at the CIA. She started there as a space and counter-space analyst with a particular focus on reconnaissance, navigation, and orbital robotic systems. As an analytic manager, she led a variety of technical teams that focused on unmanned aerial vehicles, cruise missiles, and counter-proliferation operations. In addition, she was an intelligence briefer to executives at the State Department, NSC, an editor of the President's Daily Brief, and served as the EA to the Deputy Director of National Intelligence. I am going to turn the mic over to Janaki now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you all. We are very lucky to have quite a distinguished panel here, and I will let them all introduce themselves. I'm also representing the Amazing Women in the IC, which is an organization that Suzanne helped create and came up as a way for more senior women in the IC to do a reverse mentoring, get to know some of the younger members and learn about what their needs are. So I'm really grateful to AWIC for some of the amazing women in the audience that I have met and for them to ask me to help moderate today. So today we're talking about from intent to impact, and we've heard a lot about how women can project themselves, but I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you how you have made impact in your careers. So do you want to introduce yourselves first? Janice, do you want to go first?
Sure. I am Janice Glover-Jones. I am with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I started there in January the 3rd of 1986, and I am still here. And I am the Director for Mission Services. Essentially, I tell people, if you're not familiar with our structure, I'm like the governor of the agency where I run all of the services with the exception of CIO.
So I'm Karen Gibson. I was a career soldier. I was in the U.S. Army and military intelligence for 33 years. Worked with great folks like Annette Teresi over there. Loved being an American soldier. I think not my final job, but the best jobs were either deployments or as the CENTCOM J2. I absolutely loved being the director of intelligence for military operations in a deployed environment. And then I retired in March of 20, right when the pandemic hit. 12 months later was presented with an opportunity to move over to the US Senate and be the Senate Sergeant at Arms. And I just feel briefly that I need to explain that, because when I go to receptions and I tell people, they say, what do you do? Where are you from? I say, I'm the Senate Sergeant at Arms. No one ever says, oh, me too. So I like the way you describe mission services. I really do that for the US Senate, providing the non-legislative services for the Senate, both here in Washington and at our 450 offices around the US, as well as IT, cybersecurity, and I think what we're most known for is actually the law enforcement, physical security, both of the Capitol complex of the senators themselves in their offices. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie Jones-Miller. A couple years ago, I did something crazy and left the only career I had ever known in government to jump into academia. Northeastern University hired me to be the CEO and dean of our campus in Arlington in the National Capital Region. Really focused on building the talent pipeline in the national security enterprise and managing our classified research programs. But before that, I was a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Legislative Affairs. But at my core, I'm an Air Force brat and a Hill rat. My dad is a retired defense attaché. Both my parents worked in the IC, and I spent 13 years on the Hill working for 2 members of the House Armed Services Committee.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll kick off by asking Janice a question.
Oh, okay.
I love your story of beginning your career as a GS1 and working your way up. Can you share examples of successful strategies or initiatives to support and promote gender diversity in leadership within the IC?
So at DIA, one of the things I'm proud of, and we are behind, but we got it done. We finally have, the first ever diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for the agency. And many of you think that that's not a major accomplishment, but it is, considering where we came from. And it's 5 lines of efforts where we're looking at promoting diverse candidates in office and officers, but also an inclusive workforce with the right behaviors and practices, accessibility for a hostile-free workplace, and inclusive, equitable policies, and then visualizing our data. And what that is doing is looking at the whole of it, but we are actually posturing diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond just looking at it from the lens of compliance, but actually making it a force multiplier to our mission. And looking at the fact that when we look at our nation's toughest problems that we have, we need everyone to be working that problem. And we need diversity of thought. We need different ideas and approaches to be in the room and to look at how we can conquer some of these problems. So that's one example of one of the things that we're doing, and it's not just looking at it through the lens of just gender, but it is treating everyone like they are supposed to be there. We hired you. You come with skills. You come with talent and experience. So let's leverage what we are hiring you to do.
That's wonderful. I'm really struck by that last point, visualizing data. Can you talk a little bit about how you use data and how we can be more intentional?
Yeah, so one of the things, right, when you typically look at, I like to say peeling the onion back. We typically stop at peeling the onion back at one layer, and then we drive a solution based upon what that layer is telling us, but it's really not getting to the heart of the problem. When you begin to look at your data, correlate your data, look for trends and insight that you don't necessarily have, the data can tell you a story that you think you have fixed something when you really haven't, right? So you can fix a problem over here, but you actually have second and third order of effects, and you've actually created 3 or 4 additional problems. And I want to say it's going below the surface. And so that's what we're doing with our data. Now, you got to cleanse it, right? Because data is, it is biased. And so we're doing a hard look at cleansing our data and then using it to give us additional insight, even if that insight is ugly.
That's great. Karen, could you tell us what role senior leaders play in championing women, and importantly, women of color within their organizations?
So, I'm probably going to disappoint you if I say, I think what senior leaders need to do is champion competence, and this isn't the part that'll disappoint you. But I think senior leaders have a role in championing competence and potential, and looking at their workforce. And when we are focused on those people who are demonstrating competence and potential, we are building regardless of male, female, any other kind of demographic. I think that is the way to really build a strong and inclusive workforce, and in particular, thinking about that potential part, right? I found that as a young woman in the Army, and I started in a light infantry division, which means a lot of like sleep outside, sleep on the ground, pee in the woods. In Alaska, one of very few women, once I demonstrated I was competent, people stopped worrying about which bathroom I was going to use. And good bosses want the best on their team, regardless of who that person is. And I often advise young people, when they ask this question, I say, if you are working in an office or for a person who thinks that your gender or your skin color is more important than what you bring to the table and how you contribute to the organization, you need to find a different boss or a different organization. And there are plenty out there, and don't stick with that person. So I think that it's incumbent on senior leaders to look for those who, again, competence and potential, because some people, if they haven't had the same opportunities as others, you need to look for the potential, not just what they're doing right now, because perhaps they haven't had the same opportunities to contribute. And when I look at a group of more junior folks on my team, and I see some folks whose eyes light up and I know they get it, those are the ones I want to mentor, regardless of who they are. Because I really think those are the qualities we're looking for. Yeah. Sorry if that answer disappointed.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I think that potential piece is so important, because especially I've noticed in some of so I have an analytic background, but our younger analysts sometimes don't see themselves. If they can't see somebody who looks like them, they don't see themselves out there. I once had a young analyst who I invited to work on a DEI working group with me, and she said, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to be your token black girl. And I was like, well, if you don't want to, meet the director of all the heads of all the different analytic units, then and have that exposure, that's fine. But I think you're really amazing, and I wish you would put yourself forward. And I think nobody had said that to her yet. And so when I put it in that perspective for her, and sure enough, she got to meet some really senior leaders in our organization that were able to help her guide her career. And I hope that more senior leaders will do that.
If I could, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add to what you said, Karen, about, in addition to what you said, but champion for women also requires you to speak up when we see wrong, when we see women being overlooked. It is, the greatest form of sponsorship is when they're talking about you and you don't know that they're talking about you in the room. But someone that can stand up and say, here's competence, I know what they have, here's the potential I've seen in individual X, and here's what I've seen them do over and over again. They can do this kind of task. So it is also calling out, well, why aren't we competing that to allow for these people who I know have the qualifications to do it, because often they are not the ones that get the tap on the shoulder to say, I want you to come over here and do this job or take this opportunity. So it is speaking truth to power in the rooms where it might not be popular.
Can I build on that a little bit? And I know you probably want to ask more than just 2 questions. But from a senior leader perspective, what I have seen, and I see it even in my current role, is sometimes positions are written so narrowly and the requirements for this job that it pretty much preordains who it's going to be or the small subset it's going to draw from, and it does not permit for drawing from people who are new to the organization or the field. And we all want someone who already understands space systems, who already understands the Air Force, who already understands Iraq or Gaza or whatever. And we narrow it down to who we're going to pick, and we're always drawing from that same pool. And if we want to tap into people with potential and take risk and understand that there will be a learning curve, but that you are building the bench, I think sometimes as senior leaders, we need to look closely at how narrowly we define what we're looking for key positions.
Building the bench, I think that is an excellent phrase to work with. Thank you. Jamie, I thought this question was perfect for you. How can we disrupt the traditional paths to leadership to open it up to more women and minorities? Now, you have had quite an interesting career of moving around to different places.
Thank you. I really felt like I had an identity crisis when I left the Hill to go to the Pentagon, and then when I left the Pentagon to go into the private sector. It really caused me to question, who am I and what am I about? And so I think part of the disruption is building your own table. So maybe you are not seated at the table or in the room where it happens, or maybe you are the backbencher supporting the principal. But what if you built your own table? What if you convened and gathered with people that you want to grow and learn from, and then you became champions, sponsors, mentors, opportunity spotters for one another? And I think that organic happening can propel things a heck of a lot faster than a very structured, tiered process. So that's one thing. And then I think the second thing, just demystify things for someone else. So the first time that I went to the Secretary of Defense's small group meeting, these are his 5 direct reports, his chief of staff, and his military assistant. Nobody told me that the stand-up was not just a stand-up, but also in the order of your seniority by title. And they didn't tell me where in the room the lineup was to occur. So if someone had just told me those 2 very basic things, it would have brought down my anxiety about walking into that room for the very first time and facing the Secretary of all Defense. So just disrupt by demystifying for your colleagues, for the people that work for you.
Yeah, that's great. You had also mentioned, speaking of the demystifying, talking about how to help other women through things like how do you get through the Senate hearings, or and I know I've been at different speaking events where people say, how do you even just get through the clearance process? Getting out there and doing talks to be able to help people like that is so helpful.
And I'll put in a plug for the Leadership Council for Women in National Security. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. We have a very singular mission to elevate women into the most senior national security positions, Deputy Assistant Secretary and above. We do mock hearings. We help with testimony prep. We do coaching for office calls, none of which we're trying to presume confirmation. However, let's just help women who have never seen behind the curtain figure out that process. What does it mean to go through the vetting process? What does it feel like to have to disclose all of your financials, right? This is a big deal. And so we're very specifically focused on that, bipartisan, and we feel like it's better to have a woman at the table for national security outcomes.
And I would also add is don't be afraid to take the path less traveled. I, as a senior, went out to Dell Technologies for a year to work. I didn't have any corporate America background experience. I went and worked on the corporate side to keep us all clean, so I had nothing to do with the federal government side of the house, but I went to their commercial side of the business. And I didn't know what I was stepping into, right? And so a little bit of fear, anxiety, but I did it anyway. And so I challenge you that even though you might be scared, if you get those opportunities and it doesn't look like something traditionally that you think, you know, the command and control, straight up the ladder type thing, go for it. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? You come back home. So I went out there, didn't know what to expect. It was one of the most rewarding opportunities that I had for 12 months. Go out there and do it. And don't let people, too, who don't have the authority to tell you no, to talk you out of those opportunities.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. I do want to point out that we have some people walking around with note cards. If you have any questions, please write them down and we'll try to pull them together for our panel. Thank you. So Janice, how can organizations ensure that mentorship and sponsorship opportunities are accessible to women?
So I think, right, mentorship, I tell people to have you at least 3 mentors, right? One, they can look like you, being it gender, ethnic, to understand. The second one, though, should necessarily not look like you, but have a very diverse background, different than you. Probably in the government somewhere, maybe in the IC. And then third, have someone have no idea about the government, no idea about the intelligence community and what you do, to get very diverse perspectives. And I think part of it is also too, so there's the formal mentorship relationship and making sure that we offer mentorship to people, but not all mentors are created equal, right? And so it's really about that relationship that you form with the people. And I don't push people. If you're not wanting to be a mentor to someone, I'm not going to push you, because you could also damage someone by not truly putting your heart into mentorship and believing that. So I also, too, during my tenure, I used informal mentorship through the power of observation. I observe people in meetings. I observe people, how they would handle certain situations, and then actually go to them afterwards and said, hey, listen, I saw you do this and how you handled that in that room. I would like to learn that. Would you mind taking some time to teach me on how to do that? And you can learn by people who don't necessarily get it right, too, right? Observing what not to do. So there's a formal side, there's also an informal side, and then there is the, what are you willing to bring to the relationship, too, from a mentorship perspective? So those opportunities are there, and I think there are, oftentimes people are afraid to ask. Like, I get that all the time. Oh, I was so nervous. And so I'll share a story with you. One of the junior officers at DIA worked in the badge office. And one of my seniors went down there, and she saw her, and she says, I go to the same church as Miss Glover Jones. And so my colleague said, well, did you go and say hi to her, introduce yourself? She was like, no, I can't. She was like, why can't you? So she called and told me this story. So on my break, I went down to the badge office to go to that individual, talk about demystifying, right? To go to that individual, I said, hi, I'm Janice. How long have you been at the church? Why didn't you think you could come and talk to me? And she was like, I was like, no, come on. We can talk. And so it's just breaking down those stigmas and barriers that we create ourselves. Oftentimes we create them ourselves by thinking that we can't approach someone or we can't ask them to be a mentor to us. So I would just offer that.
That's wonderful. And I think that's true. I think you often find that women are afraid. We create these own, why would that person ever want to talk to me? But I remember there was a GS9 who, at DNI, who emailed the deputy director saying, you were at a talk and you said that you're willing to mentor anybody. Will you mentor me? And we kind of were like, oh God, what's he gonna do? But he was so impressed by this woman for reaching out that he did. He ended up mentoring her, and I thought that was so brave of her and commendable for him to take the time out of his busy day to do that. So it never hurts to send that email. Okay, Karen, reflecting on your own experiences, what advice would you give to women facing setbacks or challenges in their career progression?
Yeah, I think everyone faces challenges, certainly, and many folks may think that they face setbacks. Even as a young junior officer, I'd show up at a new duty assignment and think, that's not the job I want, Don't they know I can do more? And I think as you do well, just do a good job, and that you'll be put in something with greater responsibility. But I think I've had several significant setbacks. The first one, I was 43 years old. I had missed Desert Storm because I was pregnant. Very few people went to the operation in Panama. 9/11, I was in Korea for 3 years, and I've come back. The Army had other plans for me for 3 years. Now I'm a lieutenant colonel. I feel like the only lieutenant colonel in the Army who's never deployed. How can I look soldiers in the eye if I've not shared this experience? Finally, on the 18th Airborne Corps team, set to go to Iraq, and in my pre-deployment physical, they identified that I had stage 3 breast cancer. And I thought that my career was over. They gave away my slot. I was offline for about 16 months at Walter Reed, and I thought my career was over because even at the time, Army policy, you couldn't even be an ROTC instructor on a college campus if you had not deployed. And I just thought I had no future. And it was deeply depressing. But obviously things got better, and eventually I became a 3-star general. But that was a very significant setback. I'll come back to that in a second. I faced another significant health issue in 2018, and I was a 2-star general at the time. I was the CENTCOM J2, and I was only out for about 90 days while they tried to figure out, what was wrong with me. But in those 90 days, the 4 stars convened and decided where all the junior generals were going to go, 1, 2, and 3 stars, for their next assignments. And when it was over, Scotty Barrier, who some of you may know, gave me a call, and he said, "Karen, I have bad news." He said, "You're not on the list at all. You are nowhere. Maybe we can find you an assignment in the National Guard or the Army Reserve or something," because General Milley had heard that I was going to retire. And it's kind of like the NFL draft. You can't, if after it's all done and then you look down and you go, "Oh, oops, here's a name. We forgot to do this one. They're not going to redo it." And this would just derail me at that level for 2 or 3 years. And so I don't want to take too much of your time, but there's actually, I will spare you the superfluous details. I was in a Whole Foods, a Trader Joe's in Tampa, Florida. My phone goes off. "Hello? Hey, this is Mark Milley." I was like, holy shit. It's a good thing I hadn't put anything in my cart yet, because I ran out to the parking lot so that I could take this call from General Milley and said, "Hey, I took you off the list. I heard you were retiring. Is that true?" "No, sir." "Okay." So, so they had to find me. They found me another position, and it just really, it was not a great fit. I wasn't going to do it for another 3 years. So I decided to retire, and then this sideways opportunity in the wake of January 6th, I was approached about coming to the Senate to rebuild the security team, and I tell people it's my 3rd favorite job, but lately I've been thinking it might be tied for 1st. I absolutely love it. And so what I would say, the lessons learned are, well, how do other people use this information, from career setbacks? I think they fall in one of 2 categories. And one, which would be my breast cancer experience, to be patient. If you've demonstrated competence and potential and have advocates who believe in you, they will make a place for you at the end. They will wait, and they will take you back after your, 12 months in academia or, whatever, or, you've stepped to the side to have a child. In many cases, it's just a matter of being patient. In other cases, I think if it truly seems like a dead end, which is, where I felt when I chose to retire from the Army, think about what brings you joy, what fulfills and satisfies you at work. And I guarantee you can find that somewhere else. Maybe it's another part of your agency, maybe it's another part of the IC, but it may not, it doesn't have to be a linear path. And so in my case, I'm no longer wearing a uniform, I'm no longer in the Army, I'm technically no longer part of the IC, but it's still all those things that brought me joy and pleasure. Feeling like each day you are contributing in an important way to national security, that you can pick up the paper and read a story and know that somehow you are helping with whatever that crisis is, that you are part of a team of men and women who are committed to working together to make things better. And so, I guess that's my, if it looks like a dead end, look sideways, and you will find other opportunities that bring you that same sense of joy, satisfaction, and reward that you find in your current field.
That's great. I love that. Bring you joy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you. Jamie, I think we've all heard, stories about women bosses hurting each other, you didn't do it my way. But we've also heard some great stories about women supporting each other. How can we in this room better support other women, especially since we are all very strong women? How can we support each other?
Yeah. I recently had two full circle moments happen. One, I went last year to the Women in Defense conference sponsored by NDIA. And on the sidelines of one of the panels, a woman came up to me and said, I'm a GS 13, Department of the Navy. I work at Quantico. I just started a program called Executive Potential with, I think it's the USDA graduate school program, any event. She said, I need to shadow an executive for a year. Would you be willing to sign up for this program with me? And I was like, whoa, that's a big ask. Never met her before. I said, let's schedule a time to talk. So we did, and we've been meeting about once a month since last September. And she has switched now. She's working for the Department of the Army, I think. And she's coming in 2 weeks to do a final shadow moment with me. And I felt so surprised, honored, privileged that she would ask me. And what I'm going to tell her when I see her in a week is that I have learned as much from her that I think she's probably going to say she's learned from me. So that was one full circle moment. Just saying yes to some opportunity that might come at you sideways, I think is one of those things, one of the breakthroughs that you can help another person with. And then the second thing, the reason I did this crazy turn, that my Air Force colonel retired father, who was the defense attaché at literally the largest US mission in the world in Honduras in the late 80s, who had like 300 Kodals come through his shop at the time, was like, why would you ever leave the Hill? Like, this is crazy. You've got your dream job. So my dad he cannot reconcile the fact that I'm no longer his snot-nosed congressional staffer daughter, that I'm now working in academia. He just can't process this. So when I left the Pentagon and I had this crisis of identity, like, who am I? How am I going to continue to serve? And I went to work for a lobbying firm, and the pandemic hit, and it was miserable, and et cetera, et cetera. I had a friend who was the Senate DASD when I was the House DASD. She left to go work for her alma mater, Notre Dame, to run their federal affairs shop. And Northeastern University's recruiter called her for the job that I have now. And she said, I'm not interested, I've got my dream job, but I have a friend and a colleague that I want to recommend to you. And she took it another step. So she recommended me to the recruiter, and she called me and said, take your own advice and just have the conversation. And by the way, I think you can do this job, and I will do everything I possibly can to support you in the role. And we've traded now back and forth. I'm going out to Notre Dame in a couple weeks to moderate a panel on national security strategy. And she's done me a couple solids since then, right? So that's the other thing too. Be a talent spotter for the people in your network. That's all it takes, is a person to open a door or to say, you know what, I think you can do it. And I'm so glad that she did that for me, and I'm grateful, and I've benefited from it every day.
I love that, being a talent spotter. And I think the reverse of that is also tell people what you want to do.
Yeah.
I've found that people come to me and they say, I'm really looking for this kind of a thing. And months down the road, that thing will pop up, and I'll be like, oh.
Yeah, you got to manifest. Put it out in the universe.
Yeah.
Manifest it. So I'll tell you all right now what I'm looking for. I am ready to get on my first corporate board. It's time. I've been on some nonprofit boards. It's been a great experience. I've done audit, finance, noms, governance, all the things that I think I'm supposed to do. And everyone's like, yeah, we need young women with security clearances on our corporate boards. And I'm like, hello, I'm here. Haven't gotten the phone call yet, so I'm manifesting it right here.
You put it out in the universe.
Put it out in the universe.
It's going to happen now. It's wonderful. All right, I'm going to do a quick lightning round with all of you. What was the best career advice or guidance you received, and how did it shape your path to leadership or the way you lead? Janice, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm from the South, and growing up in the South, very family oriented, and so my grandfather was a person that offered very few words, but when he spoke, right, they were powerful, meaningful, and things of that nature. He would have conversation, but there were certain things that he would just say that would hit you to your core. And I remembered, me with my cousins, and we were kind of like steps and really close together in age. And I think we had one cousin who had just graduated from high school, and then the rest of us were like juniors and sophomores and talking about what we're going to do in life. And so one time my grandfather said to us, he says, I want you to go out into the world and I want you to taste success. He said, but once you taste it, I never want you to swallow it because you just may become full of yourself. I understood it, but I really didn't understand it until I started getting the experience. So for me, that has always been a part of the thing that has shaped me. What I have always done with each promotion, I have never forgotten what it was like being GS3 in the cubicle at DIA. And so I like to keep that connection with the workforce and follow my grandfather's advice.
That's great.
I love that. That's terrific. I'll remember that one. In the Army, they have an expression: take hard jobs and do them. Take the hardest jobs and do them well. And I think that's great. 6 words, I think, that anyone can live by. But I would offer a slightly different take in terms of thinking about career progression. And this isn't the sideways aspect, but I remember one time, I have examples from my own experience, but I remember I was working for, some of you may know, Mary Legier. She was the Director of Intelligence, the Senior Intelligence Officer for the U.S. Army, and as such, she was responsible for managing the careers of all the Army colonels and lieutenant colonels with potential in military intelligence. And as we were sitting down to do a slate of who would go where, there was a proposal that this one woman, let's say her name was Jane, they want her at Fort Hood, they want her for the deputy intel chief at 3 Corps. She's got all this experience at Hood. She knows the architecture, she knows the systems, she knows the area they're deploying to. She'll be perfect in this role. And General Legier said, and that's why I'm not putting her in it, because she's not going to learn anything. She will be perfect in that job, and 5 years from now, when she's being looked at for general, people will say, she has a very narrow field of expertise, and we're looking for someone deeper. And I think that if you're in a job, unless it's your retirement position, if you're in a job that doesn't stretch you or you're not learning, then look for something different. And as you're looking for your next position, it should be something, if it's something you feel you're going to be totally comfortable in, well, maybe you're totally comfortable in never progressing again. Maybe that's what you want. But you should seek jobs in which you're going to be challenged, you're going to learn something new, and it's going to help with that, filling some knowledge gaps and experiences that you may have.
By the way, I think I would run through a wall for both of these ladies. I don't know about all of you. I'm getting kind of pumped up just hearing them talk. My grandfather used to say to me when I was growing up, Jamie, be careful, there are cannibals out there. And I thought that was an odd expression. And then probably around, I don't know, maybe 13 or 14, we moved back to the States. I'm almost 6 feet tall. I'd been wearing a uniform like my whole life in school, and all of a sudden I'm in middle school. Like, that was the worst, by the way. And I was like, yep, I am surrounded by cannibals for sure. 100%. My genes were wrong, everything was wrong. And so the next time I saw my grandfather, I said, I think I've learned something. He's like, what is that? And I was like, I think maybe I'm a cannibal. And the reason that sticks with me all the time is what propels me is I don't want to have things happen to me. I want to happen to things. I played college basketball. They always told you to be ready for the ball. to want the ball, and yeah, that's absolutely true, but I also want to have the opportunity to affect everything that's going around me with my team and not just sit back and wait for the ball. So go be a cannibal.
Yeah.
Love that. Go get it, yeah. Here's a great question from the audience. How can a male colleague advocate for a female colleague without overstepping or mansplaining? What does that look like?
Well, I think if you're talking about mansplaining, then it must be him, helping her. I've had many experiences, especially early on, like yours, with the why didn't someone tell me where we line up in the room, right? When I was a brand new junior officer, it was my first time being the intel chief, and I got up to give a briefing on an exercise, and the next 40 minutes was just being chewed up one side and down the other by the battalion commander, because I really did not do well. And when it was over, and every man on the team, and I was the only woman, and every man on the team had had this job before, not necessarily in this unit, but at some point had been what we call an S2, an intel officer, and they came up to me afterwards, and they gave me advice. And I said, I thought, why didn't any of you come to me in advance and say, let me help you, would you like to give your pitch now, should we rehearse, let me give you some tips. They all came up to me afterwards. And I think that when done, it can definitely be done without mansplaining, to assist a woman or a man or any employee with your knowledge and experience in a way that is not overbearing or pretentious. That may not answer the question on how to assist women, but I think too often people let gender get in the way. And certainly I've seen people who are leery of being seen as too close or too, especially if she's a younger or attractive woman, that it would be seen as inappropriate. And I think that should not be a barrier or impediment. There are certainly ways to do it in a manner that is still seen as professional and not mansplaining or having some other agenda.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking, okay, why does it have to be so different? Same way you advocate for your buddy,
Yeah.
right? The same way you would advocate for your daughter, your sister, your niece, right? If a person has skills, competencies, qualities that you know is right and they can do it, just say that.
Yeah.
Don't overcomplicate it or overthink it.
Yeah. I've also had experiences where, I'll give an example, a senior person on my team said, you really shouldn't talk about your kids at work. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, you have 2 daughters. How would you like it if somebody said that to your daughter? And I like to think about that sometimes, think about how you would like people to treat women in your life. Great. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I struggle with this question. I mentioned I'm almost 6 feet tall. My boss, the secretary, barely came up to my shoulders. So I just use this as an example of what is your superpower? What is the thing that you're really good at? And how do you amplify that and lean into that and use that? Mine is taking up space.
There you go. I can't do that. I do it with my big personality.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great. We've talked a lot about attracting and retaining the best and brightest, and a lot of that comes with the mid-level managers. How have you trained mid-level managers to deal with new IC recruits and a lot of this kind of multi-generational workforce? What do you think are some good tactics to think about?
So I'll start with that one, right? One of the things is I try to impress upon not just mid-level managers, but senior leaders and all of our managers, at least in the organization that I lead, is that we have a multi-generational workforce. And you have to be able to meet everybody where they are. You can't shape it and put it all in a bucket. And you have to understand that with having a multi-generational workforce, we all learn differently, we were educated differently, and I tell them, I said, look, if if you think you're struggling and you got some young nieces, nephews, cousins in your lives who are, teenage up to early 20s, have a talk with them. It's fascinating in how they want to learn, their approach to life, their outlook, and you gotta be willing to be adaptable and flexible. It's not a one size fit all. And I think that's what we have to impress upon for managers to be able to understand. And it goes back to the, one of the things that gets me is we was recently told that we had a individual who had went out on a maternity leave, and she returned back to work, and she saw this training opportunity. Well, she approached the supervisor, and the supervisor told her, "You just returned back from maternity leave. You have to earn your way back to getting training." And so when the person told me, I said, "Okay, as the senior leader, what steps did you take with that supervisor?" And, without revealing too much, they told me what they did and how we're holding them accountable, because that is not the right behaviors that we want in any supervisory position, any leadership position. So it's a myriad of things in understanding that younger generation, they like to learn. It's a TikTok generation, right? They learn things quickly. They like videos. They like to be able to do it themselves, right? And everybody is not going to go to a classroom and have a facilitator talk to them for 8 hours. So we have to have multi-mediums, multi-modes of how we reach one another and allow each generation to value what each generation brings to the table. It's constant work. I will tell you, it's not easy. It's constant work. And so I use things like we got a pilot going on now, an upskilling pilot, where we are looking at different things. We are looking at using short video clips that we can put out there to learn something new. And so you have to be able to be as dynamic and diverse as your workforce with your tools and your resources.
Mm-hmm. How did you handle that supervisor who said?
I can't really tell you.
Okay. It was handled.
But the beauty of that, though, is for those of us who are in these more senior roles, we've been building this personal bank of capital and building our network that's boundary spanning, right? And I'm at this glorious place right now where it doesn't serve me well to hold on to that capital. I'm ready to spend it for other people, because that makes me better, it makes my team better. And so I think that's the trick too. Instead of trying to isolate and hoard and keep all that to yourself, when are you willing to spend down that capital bank, and on whom? And gosh, that can make a difference in somebody else's career.
That's wonderful. Karen, any thoughts?
We do a lot of micro training. What I think of, I don't think of it as I do have a multi-generational workforce, and I don't think of it as targeted to them, but we do a lot of micro training. It's moving away from the every 6 months come to this classroom or log on to this, making it accessible all the time in little pieces that people can access for the specific things that they want a refresher on or whatever. And we also spend a lot of time communicating, way more, I think, than the predecessors in my office did, in terms of communicating with the workforce through a broad variety of means and venues. Because some people won't read the newsletter, some people won't go to the town hall, but if you have enough means by which you're communicating, you will reach everybody. And in particular, spending time talking about why we're doing what we're doing, sharing vision and intent, and providing some rationale behind what otherwise could be seen as capricious changes, or just, nobody likes change. But I have never thought of it as really a multi-generational strategy, but I do think it reaches out to all generations.
That why and communication.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm about to get the hook, so I'm going to give one last lightning round. What is the one word, keeping with the theme of intentionality here, what is the one word that you want people in your professional life to think of when they think of you? Jamie, why don't you start?
Fierce.
A warrior.
Transformational.
It's wonderful. I would say solver. So thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you, Janaki, and to our panelists. Before we take a 15-minute networking break, raise your hand if you are part of the amazing women in the intelligence community, otherwise known as AWIC. Raise them high. If you are not part of AWIC and you want to learn more, keep your hands raised, keep your hands. Reach out to somebody who has their hand raised to learn more about how to get involved. And we appreciate their help in putting together this panel for us today. We're going to reconvene at 3, right, for our next panel discussion. Thanks.